there just isn't going to be a two-state solution. And, I wish I didn't have to say that, but it's just true. The chance of a two-state solution, I think, passed 25, 30 years ago. It's long been um, an impossibility. Now it's the official stance of all kinds of countries, because that's the official UN resolution. And if it had been, a real effort had been to implement that resolution back when it was made, way back, and I guess it was shortly after the Six-Day War, um, then something could have been done. But that's not what happened. In the end, the U.S. did not really put any. They voted for it, as I understand it. That's their official stance, and has been the official stance of the U.S. government for a long time. Um, but they never put any muscle behind it, and in fact, they've done quite the opposite. And of course, they've supported all the Israeli efforts to delay and to sabotage it. And now it's just too late. It has some symbolic impact. France is the first of the G7 countries to take the step. It does, it may not happen, but it does shine a light on Israel's intransigence. It puts a little bit of diplomatic pressure on them. The Israeli government has reacted very angrily to it, as the U.S. government has. But it doesn't really change anything. And I don't, I don't expect it will. But again, it's indicative, I think, of the shifting ground, the growing anger and among people, and within the broader population, but even higher ranking people, that in various institutions and even in the media. I've been struck by some of the stories. I was reading, I guess it was a CNN story, and CNN is hardly sympathetic, doesn't have a history of being sympathetic to the Palestinians. It's just, typically it's been very much a pro-Zionist outfit. And more importantly, I've seen reports from them that were surprisingly honest about what was happening in Gaza. But then there was even this piece I saw in the New York Times this morning that struck me. I saw the title and I said, okay, I'll read this, but it's just going to be a bunch of garbage. But it was pretty honest about, the horrors of Gaza, and it didn't try very hard to exculpate the Israelis. It did say outright, is IDF soldiers are shooting these people, or starving people that are trying to get aid, and they're deprived of that aid by the Israelis. It was there. So I'm struck. I think that the Israelis have gone so far that it just, the truth can't be hidden. And some of their best friends are beginning to turn against them. We still don't see any substantive change in policy anywhere. And I wouldn't call this, recognition of Palestine by France substantive, but it may, but it may reflect something. It's just a reality, the reality of changing opinion, and it may be a harbinger of something that's to come, something that's going to be real and substantive down the road.
Right. I just feel like like you said, the ground is shifting. On BBC News as well, you'll often see some fairly accurate reporting about just the crimes that are being committed there. They'll often balance it with some IDF guy or some Israeli sympathizer. But in general, I think the majority of people are seeing now just how awful things are in Gaza. Macron says he'll recognize Palestine as a state. I think like the Spanish prime minister says that Israel's committing a genocide. The media is starting to turn on them a bit. It just feels like, how far does it have to go? At what point, when you have 80-90% of the world, Western world, that is aware of what's going on, like, when will it get to a point where it'll actually have a real effect? I mean, are we just going to have to endure this genocide on our phones while all of our political leaders maybe give lip service occasionally, but do nothing substantive in real action until Israel strikes Iran again and starts another war and goes crazy? And then that's what we have to wait for. Do you think what do you think if you're a betting man?
Well, I guess I'm very cynical and pessimistic because I've seen Israel get away with murder for such a long time, especially since October 7th, but certainly before then. And I guess I've begun to, adopt the view that things never change. It's always going to be this way. But I think that's wrong. There is it, things are changing and there will be, real repercussions to what Israel's done. It's a question of when rather than if. Again, I'm pessimistic. I think it's I tend to assume it'll be years down the road. Maybe it'll be a whole generation, but I might be wrong. Again, I was kind of taken aback. It's like New York Times has been one of the number one, Zionist propaganda organs within the U.S. for decades and decades and decades, and yeah, they were saying things that it was pretty honest. I think they could have been, there was some evidence to kind of soften the reality, but not much. Some effort to do that, but not much. And then I'm struck, I think recently in the New York Times, there was a piece by a genocide scholar, I think from Brown University. And he said, this is a genocide. He said, I've been resisting this. I didn't want to say this. Okay, but I have to admit that this is a genocide. And this was published in the New York Times. A lot of people read that, probably people who just love Israel. And I'm sure it affected quite a few of them. I'm sure he changed some minds. So there's something happening. Again, these sort of things are like an avalanche. They're hard to predict. You look at the mountain slope and it's just one solid, it's unbroken blanket of snow all the way up to the peak. But there are things that are happening, the temperature's changing slightly. And, it could be just a very minor, event, an incident. It could even, just be a loud bang or something that can trigger it. And then all of a sudden, this slope that seemed so solid can just come crashing down. And, that's often how social change happens. It can, something that never changes, it just seems unchangeable. Like the Soviet Union, it can fall in historically speaking, just a blink of an eye. And maybe that we're seeing like those first kind of indications of the approaching avalanche. I just would like to think that. Again, like if you look at what these governments are actually doing, it's all talk, nothing's happened. And I don't know if Macron or these people are incapable of doing anything that's substantive, anything that's real. But maybe they'll get thrown out, and maybe there will be, somebody who replaces them will do something really different. I'm still very pessimistic, but I have to admit there's a chance that there could be sudden and radical change. I think, what Israel has done has really woken up quite a few people, and some of those people are influential, and it's seeped into these very important media outlets. They're really the pinnacles of the media landscape, and that means something. That's going to have real consequences.
Yeah, I wonder if, Zionist control is just so total when it comes to our Congress, but not only that, just the deep state itself, the intelligence agencies. Like, can we have any change and actually have a real substantive change in policy towards Israel as long as those agencies are fully captured? Don't they have to be dismantled? Like, the deep state is just going to deep state. I mean, even if you elect people that you think might, or have a true America First stance and doesn't want to support Israel and its genocide in Gaza, will they ever actually be able to do anything? Can we get a change? It's like, no, the Zionists have control, throughout all levels of government, these unelected bureaucrats, the deep state.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the reality. So even if he did get somebody, now Trump obviously wasn't that person. He always has been a Zionist. We had some hopes for him because he occasionally says things, we've talked about all those things before. He's done some things that make you wonder how much of a committed Zionist he is. But he's not going to be the one who's going to do that. But if you got somebody in there who really wants to change something, Could he do it? If Mamdani was elected president, that's not going to happen, obviously. But if he were, could he actually change anything? He would be up against this huge apparatus. It would be an enormous fight. Uh, and probably not, but even the fight would weaken that deep state. Everything that's happened so far, I mean, see, they're still in power, but one thing that has changed, the fact that, okay, they're still there, they still have their hands on the levers of power, they are within that establishment, they are unopposed. Their power is total. But they have been exposed in a way that they never were before. Again, I know you've brought this up, but it's very true. It's just that people didn't talk about, except for, few people, really committed activists, never really talked about Zionist control or the power of AIPAC. That was a very naughty thing to talk about in the past. When John Mearsheimer came out with his book, which he co-authored with Stephen Walt, The Israel Lobby, was that back in it was during the 2000s. It was, roundly condemned. They were accused of being anti-Semites. Now these were such big names, they could do it and they could withstand the criticism. But it was a very brave thing for them to do. It actually really took guts. They were roundly attacked. And, all the media organs, certainly the New York Times condemned it, because they were such, well-regarded professors from such prestigious universities. It was something they could do. But now, what they said there seems kind of tame right now. And a lot of people are saying it. And now it's just kind of a well-known fact. This was fringe back then. It was very daring, but now it's 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 not the 5%, it's the 50% or something that is talking openly about this. That's a change, so even if these people are in charge, their power and in the end, and their actions, the support for this injustice has had a light shine on it, and just the shining of that light has weakened them. They were much stronger when they were in the dark, and people only could whisper about them, or there's only a few people out on the fringes who could say something. That has changed. So yeah, they're powerful, and they're going to hang on to power, and they may hang on to power for a long time. But I think that again, it's just like the clock is ticking against them. This is the beginning of the end. It may still be years and years in the future where they finally fall. And maybe that we have 75% of the population that is strongly against Zionism, and they'll still be there. But it can't keep on going. It's unsustainable, for much longer.